Hi everyone, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Zoe. I'm one of the science publishers at OUP. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we create and share our learning resources. I acknowledge the traditional custodians as the original storytellers, teachers, and students of the land we call Australia. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. All right, so today we're going to have a whistle-stop tour of all things QCE psychology. First of all, we'll run through a summary of the key changes to the structure and content of the new syllabus. We'll look at the challenge of science inquiry skills. We'll do an activity which hopefully helps you reach a conclusion and a solution about the statistics challenge. And then we'll have a look at Psychology for Queensland Units 1 to 4 second edition. And we should have some time for questions at the end. Also, if you've got questions throughout the webinar, please type them into the chat and we'll endeavour to answer them as we go. Otherwise, we'll come back to them at the end. I'd like to introduce you to our presenters and authors. They are both highly experienced teachers of QCE Psychology. Amrita Moss is a certified highly accomplished teacher and she's currently with St John Fisher College. She's had extensive experience with the QCAA and is the co-author of the Oxford Study Buddy for QCE Psychology Units 3 and 4. And Aliska Bierman has been the lead designer of the teaching and learning programs for Psych at years 9 to 12 at her school, Brisbane State High. She's had extensive experience with the QCAA as well, and she's also an existing author for OUP. She's worked on curriculum content for both Queensland and the Victorian curriculums. All right now, Amrita is going to talk us through the key changes to the structure and content of the new psychology syllabus.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I suppose the best way to start is to kind of holistically look at the syllabus. The QCAA has really worked to streamline what is actually in the syllabus. It has been reduced significantly in terms of the pages. And so the information there is focused on the content and what we have to teach rather than a lot of words here and there, which made the syllabus quite bulky. And there's been a reduction to objectives. So the communication objective has been removed. And there's been a restructure for all the sciences in terms to align with the Australian curriculum. So you've got science understanding, science as a human endeavour remains, and science inquiry, and that's reflected in all the sciences in QCAA. They do not refer to mandatory pracs anymore, so the language is changed in terms of interpret research. And the suggested research has also been removed, and the assessment has been integrated into one section rather than throughout the syllabus, which I find a lot easier to manage. And the key research skills that is at the beginning of the syllabus, page 14 or 16, I can never remember, and now it's changed into science inquiry skills, and the glossary is removed, and the link has been made to the glossary list for all of the sciences. So in terms of the key changes from the syllabus, so the things that we've seen that have been added is the acknowledgement of sources and referencing as an ethical principle, which I think is very important in psychological research and in terms of studying psychology. And there's some information about graphical and numerical or algebraic form, I can't say that word, form, and risks and environmental impacts, including cultural guidelines, has been added, which is great. And p-values associated with correlation inferential tests like Pearson's have been included. Things that have been removed are the ethics committee, inductive content analysis, which I note that I don't think anybody really talked about, and it never really appeared in external exams, so that was great. And the big thing was the removal of non-parametric tests, Mann-Whitney U and Wilcoxon sign rank test. The thinking behind that, and this is from QCEE because I've had a chat to Jeff, is that with consultation with universities and academics, they found that they no longer teach those less powerful non-parametric tests, and so t-tests are probably where universities are going to. So there was really no need for looking at the non-parametric tests. Okay, so I have to remember to keep moving the slides. Another big factor that we need to take into account as teachers is the fact that cognitive verbs have changed, and some of the ones that are a bit of a nuisance have been removed, which is lovely. So things like consider, which is not very great. It's not good in figuring out how to answer an exam question with the cognitive verb consider. So those type of cognitive verbs have been removed, which is fantastic. And I guess when we're looking at the new syllabus, we're going to have a look at how the cognitive verb has changed, and that will indicate the depth of knowledge that the students will need. So you can see the increase of different types of cognitive verbs on the screen there. So assess is another one that has been removed, which is great, and evaluate. Evaluate questions can't be asked in the external exam, so it's good to see those cognitive verbs being removed from Unit 1 and 2. Oh, even though it's not relevant, evaluate for 1 and 2 have been removed. In terms of this next one, 3 and 4, we've noticed there's a change from distinguish to discriminate. I'm not sure why, but that seems to be a big thing there, as well as interpret, which is probably marked by the fact that it's the new way of referring to mandatory studies that we used to have. Distinguish is still there, but there's the addition to discriminate. And again, removing of those strange cognitive verbs like consider has been a welcome change. So Unit 1, so the key changes here, I'm just having a look, sorry. The psychological science topics have been removed, and that has kind of triggered the numbering of the other topics to be shifted. So that's fantastic, because I'm not sure about you, but those psychological science topics didn't really help in terms of what the depth in which we needed to teach them. And the reference to studies have moved from the science understanding to science as a human endeavor. And we found that cognitive development hasn't really changed all that much. In Unit 1, there's not massive changes, besides obviously the notional time for the brain has increased, and that's probably indication that we need to spend a bit more time on the brain, and the cognitive verbs have changed to indicate that we have to teach the brain parts in a bit more depth. Unit 2, again, there's not a huge amount of change besides the removal of psychological sciences B. Intelligence, there's not a lot of change besides the addition to an additional theory. Diagnosis, there's little change. There's obviously been an update to the DSM and the ICD, which is very important because we should be referring to the most up-to-date versions. And the motion and motivation topic, there's a few minor tweaks on the physiological processes to refer to the limbic system structures, as well as including an updated study for Locke. And then they've removed a study there as well. For Unit 3, I note obviously with the brain topic, that's been a big change in terms of cognitive verbs. And my apologies, I went too far. And I suppose the biggest change in content which we'll have to consider is the fact that visual perception has changed to include hearing as another sense. And so that is brand new content in terms of what we have to teach, which means we lost things like illusions, which is a bit of a pity because that probably makes this topic a little bit more fun to teach. That's not to say we can't show students visual illusions, but it won't be tested on the external exam, and biological influences have been removed. Learning, you will note that the studies are now not specific to, the mandatory studies are not specific to Skinner or oh my God, I've got a mental blank. Not Skinner. What's the other one? Yeah, it's just gone out of my head. The learning, observational learning, classical conditioning, and operant conditioning. We don't have to know the details about specific studies, but just need to know how it was studied. So the studies have shifted. So students used to have to know 21 studies, and now it's been reduced to 10, which is like a very, very welcome change indeed. For Unit 4, again, there's not a huge amount of change, just a few additions in terms of cultural explanations of attraction, which makes sense. And origin of attraction includes self-disclosure and looking at stereotypes, not just from a negative kind of point of view, and adding the advantages of stereotyping as well. And then with the cross-cultural psychology, they've explicitly referred to First Nations people's experience in the science as a human endeavor, which is great. And we've removed sexism and ageism, which was really narrow in terms of the questions that could be asked for the external exam. So I think making that a little bit broad was a good idea. I think the next one is assessment. Hopefully I'm okay for time. I'm sure Zoe will tell me if I'm going too slow. So you will notice for the data test, you've got the same objectives and cutoffs, but the focus has been shifted in terms of the cognitive verbs are much more narrow and similar, and the table is not as messy as you can see there. So the data test remains pretty much unchanged. So we'll still have to battle doing the data test moving forward. We can't get away from that. In terms of the IA2 and IA3, the objectives have changed slightly, all 6 including 1, so you can see that there. The bigger change, I suppose the one that we are very happy about, is the change to the ISMG. Now each criteria is worth 5 marks, and there's an odd number of descriptors in each, which will make determining where a student's mark lies a lot easier. And the QCEE has looked at using existing confirmed samples and using the new ISMG, and they found that it really distinguishes the top end, which is great. Sometimes, well, I know for myself, personal experience, a student might get 17 and they might not be really a 17 student. And so it kind of, I think it's a bit more fair in terms of the mark allocation for students. And the lower band makes it easier in terms of, say, if we're looking at limitations and uncertainty, the lower option will be limitations or uncertainty, where the top band would be limitations and uncertainty, which is fantastic. And communication marks in the current syllabus were really easy, like it was a giveaway kind of mark. If we, like as a teacher, I'd give most of my students 2 because I wouldn't disadvantage them by giving them 1 if I could find evidence that they hit that criteria. So they've spread out that communication descriptor amongst the different criterion, and I think it makes it a lot more fair for students as well. Let's see what else I've got. Oh, this is you, Aliska, I think. We're good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, awesome. I'll hand off to Aliska, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Amrita, and good evening, everyone. I do apologize. I'm sort of near a window. It's the best light, but there might be a bit of noise. So hopefully we'll get through this. So just a little bit about science inquiry skills. The new syllabus has renamed them. There's 3 pages worth, so there's quite a lot to get through. And the idea here from the syllabus is that this is integrated as part of your teaching practice. So really trying to give students some experience with the pracs and then helping them understand that the same skills they need for the data test is what they need for their student experiment, is what they can apply to their research investigation. And so to help that, one of the nice changes that Oxford has made is there are lots and lots of practice questions in each chapter of the textbook. So you will find skill drills and data test style questions at the end of each chapter that are then contextualized to the content of that chapter. We've also expanded chapter 1 and included a bit more information on statistics and resources to help teachers and students alike. So to that end, we decided to do an activity today based on statistics. And as Amrita mentioned, one of the key changes to this syllabus is that they've removed non-parametric tests. And so what we're left with is our parametric t-tests. Something they did add, and you'll see that in the green box below, is so students get to use parametric tests. Great. The decision making is reduced, but they do need to now identify and explain uncertainty associated with their conclusions by referencing limitations of the data, but also including violations of assumptions associated with those inferential tests. And so that's what we're going to look at. So here's our statistics challenge to you. Before we start, let's just do a quick little recap on t-tests. So you are most likely aware that there are 2 main categories. This is either paired, if you have repeated design, or if they have a matched design. I'm yet to see a student class do a matched design, but repeated is quite common for us, especially because we tend to have rather small classes, and so they need repeated numbers to get those sample sizes up. Or an unpaired t-test if they're doing an independent groups design. And so for all of these t-tests, we are trying to work out the probability of our null hypothesis being true. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but a t-test has a probability distribution, much like our p-value. It just tends to be a little shorter, and that distribution changes with sample size. And so because we have a probability distribution, there are assumptions associated with the t-test that make it appropriate. So the first 2, that your dependent variable is interval or ratio data, that is part of the student's methodology and really should be something that we need to help them during their design to ensure that they're actually collecting interval and ratio data and steering away from nominal or ordinal. The second one, independently sampled observations. Again, that should be part of their methodology. And that's just making sure that the results from one test are not dependent on another. So as long as they're doing different tests or they have independent groups, this should be fine. The remaining two, dependent variable that has a normal distribution, that is something that they should be able to test, and they should be able to do this with Year 9 level maths. And then the last one is if they have a paired t-test, it's not really applicable, but if they have an unpaired or an independent t-test, they need to have a look at equal variance. Now, if any of you have gone through uni, you might be used to some more advanced statistical techniques like Levene's test for equal variance. But since we're not going to expect them to do that at high school, we're probably just going to use standard deviation, or maybe you've taught them variance to be able to assess that assumption. And so our activity then. So keeping in mind those assumptions, in our first sample, we have a paired t-test. You have, I forget, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so we have 10 data points of some absolutely fictional test. This is purely for our exercise of a pre and post test. We've worked out the mean and standard deviation. And just in case, I've included both a 1 and a 2-tailed t-test results, p-value. And then underneath, these histograms are created in Excel using a frequency table. So that's something students should be able to do fairly simply. And then they just create a column graph. And so my question to our beautiful attendees is, if you analyze the data, A, could you identify whether the assumptions of, whether the assumptions are met or violated? So to get a bit of responses from you, we've got a poll. And the first poll is going to ask you whether the pre-test histogram has a normal distribution. Awesome. So for the first poll, we've got 8 saying yes, it's normal, and a few more. Okay, so at the moment, according to the poll for the pre-test histogram, we're close to 50-50 with a few more people thinking it doesn't show a normal distribution. And the post-test is much clearer result with most of you thinking that it's violating the normality assumption. All right, next question before we move on is, do we need to worry about equal variance? All right, we're exactly 50-50 for that one. So I'll just jump back to the previous slide. So the good news is if you have a paired t-test, meaning you have the exact same sample in both conditions, we don't need to worry about the equal variance. It's not a factor that goes into the calculation. So for this example then, most people think that the post-test is definitely not normal. We're close to 50-50 with a few more thinking our pre-test is not normal. And you've told me that we don't need to worry about equal variance. So the next question then is, well, what is the uncertainty? If we violate assumptions for a t-test, what is the uncertainty that may arise from that? What are some things that we could ask or expect the students to write for us? So if you wouldn't mind typing some responses in the chat box. Okay, so a few answers that have popped up include sample size, maybe type errors. A few of you've mentioned validity. If you violate assumptions on a t-test, you increase uncertainty. Fantastic. Yeah, so a lot of those are on the right track. So in this case, because the syllabus doesn't require them to do non-parametric tests, You could address this in a couple of ways. Either you could teach your students non-parametric tests, in which case you might expect them to then justify their choice in their data processing. And if they violate assumptions, maybe you want them to do non-parametric equivalence. The syllabus doesn't specify them, and so therefore they should be allowed to do a t-test and then maybe discuss any uncertainty with those violations as part of their analysis. So just for your information, the histogram interpretation can be a bit subjective, and we'll certainly see that with another example. To test this then, I actually went and did Shapiro-Wilks to see if I used the statistical software, what would I get? The one on the left, the pre-test, came back as normal. It was fine. The one on the right, the post-test, definitely failed the normality assumption. And so as you've all identified, the uncertainty here then is, well, maybe our t-test is not giving us the correct p-value. And since we rely on the p-value to make our conclusion and to infer statistical significance, there's now ambiguity in those results. And that could mean that we have an incorrect p-value, which someone identified. We could talk about type errors. And you would certainly link that to validity, because if our p-value is incorrect, we've drawn incorrect conclusion, and that would definitely affect the validity of our results. And that was me answering question C instead of asking you. Apologies. All right, so shall we try sample 2 again? This one is an unpaired t-test. Once again, it's completely fictional data, but we have treatment A and a completely different treatment B. We have some data, mean and standard deviation, and then both p-value results. And once again, we have some histograms. So the question to you, and we'll open the poll for this, is, are the histograms normally distributed? All right, so we've got 32 responses, with the majority of you saying the histogram shows a normal distribution. Looking at the data, does this show equal variance? Okay, I might just move along then. So for this one, the treatment A histogram does show a normal distribution, while treatment B is also normal. And the reason I wanted to include treatment B is trying to put your student lens on. For that one, if students came to me and said, well, you've kind of got this rise on the right-hand side and then it sort of teeters off to the left, and they were to reason that with me, I would accept them telling me that normality is violated. And that is because we're using histograms. It is quite subjective, and we're not expecting students to be able to use university or specific stat software to assess normality. So again, that depends on, I suppose, what software is available or how you want to teach your students. But for us, and I just taught this to my year 10s, we did histograms, and they just had to try and tell me if it's roughly bell-shaped. If it looks more like a bell shape than not, they can argue that it has a normal distribution. If it's clearly skewed, I would expect them to tell me that normality is violated. In terms of equal variance, it matters because this is an unpaired t-test, and as most of you identified, the equal variance assumption is violated because the second standard deviation is so much bigger than the first. And if you were to do your Shapiro-Wilk and Levine's tests, then you would see both distributions are normal. And yes, the equal variance assumption is definitely violated. And so this brings us back to identifying uncertainty and limitations. And I think in terms of time, I might just move ahead, but we have the same issues as before. As soon as your assumptions are violated, then it starts to reduce the certainty of your p-value calculation. We use our p-value to draw conclusions, and so therefore that starts being questionable, and that could affect the overall validity. For interest, for myself, I actually wanted to go and do the non-parametric versions just to see if that would give me any differences in the conclusions I would draw. And I think this supports what QCEE is going for, that the t-test is actually a lot more robust than what we would believe. So if you did non-parametric versions, you would have drawn the same conclusions. Now, we wouldn't expect students to do both, but we just want to be able to elicit their thinking and have them demonstrate some understanding of these t-tests, that there are assumptions that they need to assess, and that if those are violated, it increases the uncertainty within their results, and that's something that they could talk about. There was a third example, but I think we might move ahead. Zoe, if you're okay with that, great. There was one question for Rachel, and that is that, yes, we can assess normality just through a visual inspection of histograms. And for the Shapiro-Wilk, Tammy, I just went to free software social science statistics, I believe. Or it was one of those online calculators, put the data in and just use that. So I just want to make sure that whatever stats I do, I have free options that most students would be able to access. Great. I will now, and just for your information, there are work solutions to these handouts, and in it there are some teaching notes as to the reasoning behind things, or what you may or may not want to include when you teach it. I will now hand back to Zoe. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Aliska. Everyone, I'm going to take you through a whistle-stop tour of Oxford Psychology for Queensland, Units 1 to 4. So this series comprises our print student books, student digital access and teacher digital access, and you can also buy a value pack which is digital or blended, including all of those products. What you don't see here this time is a student workbook. We have not produced one this time, but we have taken the features that our surveys told us were liked by all of you and incorporated those into the student books. So let's have a look at the student books now. We have a new structure this time. So our books are divided into units, and then what were chapters are now modules, and modules incorporate the subject matter from the science understanding, and lessons are part of the modules, and they comprise the dot points from the syllabus. We've chunked our content more. We have included this time prior knowledge quizzes. So these are online quizzes that are going to help you assess student understanding of related concepts to what's to come, and they provide support to fill in any gaps. We've got list of practs on the front, and what we will also provide are study summaries, so they will be available online and signposted on this module opening page. And even though the studies have been reduced, they still exist and they're still difficult for students to access, so these summaries will be prepared to assist students. And as Amrita and Aliska have mentioned, we have completely updated the psychology toolkit, so there's a lot more support for statistics there. Right, so once we get into the student book, we have our list of key ideas at the beginning of each lesson, and they are phrased as concept statements, and we also include a link to learning intentions and success criteria. Now, they're available for every lesson, and they are based on the syllabus dot points. We've got, what have we got? We've got the usual features there. We've got modules organised into lessons, which will support part of our digital features. And online we have checklists, and these are supporting student metacognition, and they include all the success criteria for each chapter for the all the lessons combined. So your students can assess how they're going with the work, if they're feeling confident and not, And you see that as well in your teacher dashboard, and that can give you, a heads up that someone's not feeling great, but that might not match with their actual results. So you can have a chat in that case if you need to with your students. The other things are not new here. We've got key term definitions in the margins and study tips. These are some of the features here that we've taken from the student workbooks and added to the student books. We have skill drills. So each one of the skill drills is linked to a lesson in the toolkit, and each of those lessons in the toolkit is linked to a group of science inquiry skills that are listed in the syllabus. So students can go back to those lessons in the toolkit if they're having a problem with any of those skills. We also have data drills, and they're provided at the end of every module, and they're written in the style of the data test. So your students will be well prepared by the time they get to the end of Unit 4 or Unit 3, so they can do their data test. We have real-world psychology this time. Now, we noticed that the science as a human endeavour spreads in the existing psychology books haven't been used. So what we've done is we've taken some of that content and integrated it into the context of the science understanding materials. So it just sits in the flow of the rest of the content, makes it easier to teach and provides a bit of interest for your students. And at the end of those, we've also got some apply your understanding questions, and they encourage students to connect the human endeavour concepts to the science understanding descriptors. We have loads and loads of questions. We have check your learning questions at the end of every module. We have module reviews at the end of, check your learning at the end of every lesson, module reviews at the end of every module, topic reviews, they're new this time, and unit reviews. The questions are organised in order of increasing cognitive difficulty and according to Mazzano and Kendall's taxonomy. And we have included marks this time, and that helps your students get used to working to a mark allocation. That will give them a great advantage once they get to exam time. Assessment support, we have plenty of it. Not only do we have questions, we have a feature at the end of every unit called Exam Essentials that provides students with an exam tip that they can apply when they're answering questions. They can see how that exam tip is applied in a high scoring response or not applied in a low scoring response. And then once they've done that, they are given a question and a response and a marking guide. So they apply their understanding of the exam tip as well as the marking guide to mark that response. We've also got exams, practice data tests, and this time we've added sample IA2 and IA3. Of course, we've got practicals for all interpret cognitions are provided there. We've got risk assessments and lab tech notes if those are necessary for the site pracs. All right, so now I'll draw breath before I launch into talking about the key features of our digital platform. So this has had a complete rework for this edition of Psychology for Queensland, and we've done this to help engage students and improve their performance. So we've really focused on learning design principles. Our content is fully accessible, and we've integrated questions and activities into that digital content. And support for teachers has been increased. So we've got our flexibility, so you can support in-class instruction. You can also teach if your kids are out of the classroom. We've got digital and blended options, and we have a new live lesson mode. So that's a fully integrated, timed and sequenced online lesson support, and we've got data and reporting tools. We have some digital partners. We have Quizlet. I presume most of you are familiar with Quizlet. That replaces the flashcard glossary this time, and it also gives you access to some different games and quizzes that you can use based on vocab. We use Learnosity. We partner with them to create our auto and teacher mark questions and our results and curriculum reports. And we also partner with ClickView. So we've curated a selection of syllabus aligned videos, so you don't need to rummage through yourself and see what you can find. We'll do that work for you. Just a question in the Q&A from Brianna about access to Oxford Digital, whether schools will pay the fee as normal next year and the new material will be available, or whether it's a new subscription?
It will be a new subscription to the new platform. The current one will be kept alive, I believe, for a short while, but please do talk to Melissa or myself and we will take you through that. But yes, new subscription, new product, new subscriptions need to be renegotiated.
It will be different next year for Units 1 and 2 and Units 3 and
Absolutely.
4, because Units 3 and 4 continues to be taught next year.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. We got any other questions? I know we've run a bit over time. Cora, difference between the essential and premium packages. The premium package includes the live lesson mode. So that's the integrated lesson plans that occur. The essential package includes Word versions of the lesson plans. And with the premium package, digital updates will continue to be made. So we're working on some AI tools for the premium package, and they will be integrated when they're available without you paying an additional fee. For example, we're imagining, hopefully, that in a couple of years, we might be able to answer the teacher mark questions with AI. So that's going to save you a bit once we get up to that point. So that's the type of thing we're looking at. All right. Looks like we're quietening down, and thank you for staying online, given that we've run over time. If you have
there's a question there about Study Buddy. Study Buddies, Zoe, they will be updated for the new curriculum, but current Study Buddy is relevant for this year's Year 12s.
And next year's Year 12s as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the current version is still relevant for the next 2 years.
All right. Well, thank you very much for hanging around after the advertised finish time. Hope you've enjoyed the webinar and got some useful information from it. Please do access the handouts. There you've got what have you got? You've got sample lesson plans for practicals and a regular lesson. You've also got a draft table of contents for the student book, and you have that answer sheet for the activities that Aliska ran us through today. Oh, thank you very much.